My name is Enid Davila, and I'm 32 years old. And the night my parents threw me out of the house, it wasn't just cold outside, it was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. It was Thanksgiving. The table was full, laughter echoed through the walls, and yet somehow, I had never felt more unwanted in my entire life. I remember standing there, plate in hand, watching my mother smile at my younger sister like she was the only child she had ever loved. And then, in one moment, everything shattered. My father's voice cut through the room like a blade. If you can't respect this family, you can leave. And just like that, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't always the problem child. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the one who studied late, who worked part-time jobs, who never asked for anything extra. But my sister, Liana, she was different. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even when she did everything wrong. If she lied, it was a mistake. If I spoke the truth, it was attitude. And over the years, that difference grew sharper and more painful until it felt like I was living in someone else's family. Like I had to earn love that was given to her freely. That Thanksgiving started like every other, forced smiles, polite conversations, tension hidden beneath the surface. But this time, something was different. Liana had just announced her engagement, and the entire room erupted in applause. My mother cried tears of joy. My father hugged her fiancé like he was already a son. And me? I sat there, clapping slowly, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. Because no one asked how I was doing. No one noticed that I had just lost my job the week before. No one cared. Until I made the mistake of speaking. I just think it's fast, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. The room went silent. Liana's smile faded instantly, her eyes narrowing as she turned to me. Of course you would say that, she snapped, her tone dripping with bitterness. You've always been jealous of me. The words hit harder than I expected. Jealous. Of what? The favoritism? The constant validation? I felt my chest tighten, but I stayed calm. I'm not jealous, I replied. I'm just worried. But in this family, concern was never seen as love. My father slammed his hand on the table so hard the plates rattled. That's enough, Enid, he said, his voice cold and final. You always find a way to ruin things. I felt my throat close up, my hands trembling as I tried to explain myself. I'm not ruining anything. No, he interrupted sharply. You don't get to do this today. Not here. My mother didn't even look at me. She just shook her head, disappointment written all over her face. And in that moment, I realized something that broke me more than their words ever could. They had already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. The argument escalated faster than I could process. Liana stood up, tears streaming down her face, playing the victim perfectly. I knew she would do this, she cried. She always has to make everything about her. I looked around the room, searching for anyone to defend me. But all I saw were averted eyes and uncomfortable silence. Even my own parents refused to meet my gaze. It felt like I was invisible, like I didn't belong there anymore. And maybe deep down I never did. Get out! The words were quiet this time, but they carried more weight than anything else that had been said that night. I turned to my father, hoping I had heard him wrong. But his expression didn't change. If you can't be happy for your sister, you don't need to be here, he continued. My heart dropped. Dad, it's Thanksgiving, I whispered, my voice cracking. But he didn't care. None of them did. Leave, he repeated. And just like that, I was being erased from my own family. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out, the sound of laughter slowly fading behind me as the door closed. The cold air hit my face instantly, but it wasn't as sharp as the pain in my chest. I stood there for a moment, staring at the house I grew up in, the house that no longer felt like home. And then I started walking. No destination, no plan, just away. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who break you the deepest. That night, I slept in my car, wrapped in an old jacket, replaying everything over and over in my head. Every word, every look, every moment that led to this. And somewhere between the tears and the silence, something inside me shifted. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I had nothing left to lose. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. The next morning didn't feel like a new day. It felt like the aftermath of something that had already destroyed me. My body ached from sleeping in the car, my fingers numb from the cold, and for a moment, I just sat there staring at the fog on the windshield, trying to remember who I was without them. My phone had no messages, no missed calls, not even a single "Are you okay?" And that silence, it said everything. I wasn't just thrown out. I had been forgotten overnight. I forced myself to move, to think, to survive. I drove to a nearby cafe, ordered the cheapest coffee, and sat in the corner charging my phone like it was my last connection to the world. I opened my email, hoping for anything that could ground me. That's when I saw it. A message I had almost ignored the night before, buried under everything else. The subject line read, "Final confirmation." My heart skipped. I clicked it open, my hands trembling slightly, and in that moment, everything began to shift. It was from a company I had interviewed with weeks ago when I thought I had no chance with. A senior strategy firm in the city, competitive, ruthless, the kind of place that didn't take chances on people like me. But they had. "We are pleased to offer you the position." I stopped reading. I couldn't breathe. After everything, after losing my job, after being thrown out, it didn't feel real. It felt like the universe was playing some kind of twisted joke on me. But it wasn't a joke. It was an opportunity. I let out a shaky laugh, the kind that comes right before tears. Because suddenly the girl who had nothing had something. Not just a job, but a chance to start over. A chance to prove that I was never the problem. I accepted the offer right there, in that quiet corner of the cafe, with no one to celebrate with. No family. No hugs. Just me. And the sound of my own heartbeat reminding me that I was still here. Still standing. The next few weeks were brutal. I worked harder than I ever had before, learning everything I could, staying late, showing up early, refusing to fail. There were nights I still slept in my car, too proud to ask anyone for help, too determined to go back. Every rejection I had ever faced, every word my family had thrown at me, it all became fuel. "You're not enough. You ruin everything." Those voices echoed in my mind, and I used them to push myself further. Slowly, things began to change. I saved enough to rent a small apartment, nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a door that no one could slam in my face. I bought my own furniture, piece by piece, building a life that was entirely mine. And for the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace, not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind that comes when you realize you don't have to fight for a place in someone's life anymore. But even as I moved forward, a part of me stayed stuck on that night. The words, the betrayal, the way they looked at me like I didn't belong. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I was better off. And maybe I was. But healing isn't instant. It lingers. It whispers. It reminds you of what you lost, even when you're trying to focus on what you've gained. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted again. I was at work reviewing a client file when I saw a familiar name. My stomach dropped instantly. Davila Holdings. My family's business. The same business my father had spent decades building. The same one he always said would go to Liana. My hands froze over the keyboard, my mind racing. Because, according to the file, they weren't thriving. They were drowning. Debt, legal issues, failed investments. The words blurred together as I read further, my heart pounding louder with every line. This wasn't a small problem. This was collapse. And the worst part? My firm had just been assigned to evaluate whether the company could be saved, or if it should be shut down completely. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, trying to process what this meant. Because the family that threw me away was now standing on the edge of losing everything. And for the first time since that night, I felt something different. Not pain, not sadness, but something quieter, sharper. A realization that settled deep in my chest. Life had a strange way of circling back. And this time, I wasn't the one standing outside in the cold. I stared at the file for a long time, longer than I should have. My reflection faintly visible on the dark screen, as if I were looking at two versions of myself at once. The girl who had been thrown out, and the woman now holding their future in her hands. My chest felt tight, not from sadness this time, but from the weight of what this meant. Because this wasn't just business. This was personal. And yet, no one in that office knew that the company they were dissecting had once been my home. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning. I barely slept that night, my mind replaying every possible outcome, every possible reaction. Would they recognize me? Would they pretend not to? Would they even care? I told myself to stay professional, to treat this like any other case. But deep down, I knew this was different. This was the moment where everything I had been through would collide with everything I had become. When I walked into that conference room, my hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. The air was tense, thick with quiet desperation. And then I saw them. My father looked older, the sharp confidence he once carried now dulled by stress. My mother sat beside him, her posture stiff, her eyes tired. And Liana? She looked exactly the same, but something in her expression had changed. Less arrogance, more fear. For a second, no one spoke. And then my father looked up, and everything stopped. His eyes locked onto mine, confusion flickering into recognition. Enid? He said, my name leaving his lips like something fragile, something unfamiliar. The room shifted instantly. My colleagues glanced between us, sensing the tension but not understanding it. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay composed. Good morning, I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Let's begin. Because I wasn't here as their daughter anymore. I was here as a person deciding their fate. The presentation started, numbers filling the screen, facts laid out with brutal honesty. I walked them through every detail, the losses, the failed decisions, the risks they could no longer ignore. And with every word, I watched their expressions change. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hands trembled slightly. Liana avoided my gaze completely. This wasn't an emotional conversation. This was reality. And reality didn't care about family. At one point, my father interrupted, his voice strained. There has to be another option, he said, leaning forward like he was trying to hold on to something already slipping away. I met his eyes, the same eyes that once told me to leave. There are always options, I replied evenly. But they come with consequences. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, because for the first time, he was the one asking, and I was the one deciding. Liana finally spoke, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. You're really going to do this? She asked, looking at me like she was searching for the sister she used to control. For a moment, something flickered inside me. A memory, a feeling, a past that refused to completely disappear. But then I remembered that night. The door closing. The silence. The cold. And just like that, the hesitation was gone. I'm doing my job, I said simply. Not cold, not cruel. Just honest. Because this wasn't revenge. It was consequence. Every choice they had made, every decision they ignored, it had led them here. And I was no longer the girl begging to be seen. I was the woman they couldn't ignore. The meeting ended without resolution, but the message was clear. They were running out of time. As they gathered their things, there was an awkwardness in the air, something unfinished, something waiting to be said. My mother looked at me like she wanted to speak, but the words never came. My father hesitated, his pride battling something deeper. And Liana? She just stared, her expression unreadable. As I walked out of that room, I felt it again, that shift, that quiet transformation settling into my bones. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't fighting to belong. I had already stepped into a world where I mattered. And now they were the ones trying to find a place in it. But what I didn't know yet was that this wasn't the real turning point. Because the truth behind their downfall, the secret they had buried for years, was about to surface. And when it did, it wouldn't just change their future. It would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my past. The truth didn't come crashing in all at once. It revealed itself slowly, like a crack spreading through glass until the whole surface shattered. It started with a document buried deep in the financial records, something that didn't match the timelines my father had presented. A transfer, large, quiet, hidden behind layers of transactions meant to distract anyone who wasn't looking closely. But I was looking closely, because something in my gut told me this wasn't just bad business. This was something else entirely. I requested access to older files, records that went back years, long before the company started declining. At first, there was resistance, excuses about missing archives. Incomplete data, but persistence has a way of making people uncomfortable. And eventually, the truth began to surface. Shell accounts. Questionable investments. Money moved in ways that didn't make sense unless you knew exactly what you were trying to hide. My chest tightened as I pieced it together. Because this wasn't failure. This was fraud. I sat alone in my office that night, the city lights flickering outside the window, as everything connected in my mind. The debts, the lawsuits, the sudden collapse, it wasn't bad luck. It was the consequence of years of manipulation, of choices made behind closed doors. And at the center of it all was my father, the man who taught me about honesty, the man who threw me out for disrespect. The irony burned deeper than anything else. Because the person he accused me of being was the person he had been all along. But the real shock, the one that made my hands tremble, came from a file I almost overlooked. A legal document, old, sealed, my name was on it. I opened it slowly, my breath catching as I read the words that followed. It wasn't just about the company. It was about me. A trust, set up years ago. Money that had been moved, redirected, concealed. And according to the document, it had been taken. Not lost. Not mismanaged. Taken. I felt the room spin as the realization hit me. This wasn't just business corruption. This was personal. My father hadn't just risked the company, he had taken something that was meant for me. Something I never even knew existed. And suddenly, everything made sense in a way that made me sick to my stomach. The favoritism. The distance. The way I was always pushed aside. It wasn't just preference. It was guilt. And instead of facing it, they erased me. The next day, I called for another meeting. This time, it wasn't just a review, it was a confrontation. When they walked into the room, I saw it immediately. The tension. The fear. They knew something had changed. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed the documents on the table, sliding them forward slowly. My father's eyes dropped to the pages, and the color drained from his face. My mother covered her mouth. Liana froze completely. "You want another option?" I said quietly, my voice calm but uncheckable. "Let's talk about the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. No denial, no interruption. Just the sound of everything unraveling. My father's hands shook as he tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Because for the first time, he wasn't in control of the narrative. "You didn't just destroy your company," I continued, my gaze fixed on him. "You stole from your own daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mother let out a quiet sob. Liana whispered something under her breath, but I couldn't make it out. It didn't matter. Nothing they said could change what was already exposed. Because this wasn't an accusation, it was proof. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. The power had shifted completely, not because I took it, but because they had lost it. Every lie, every secret, every decision, it had all led them here. To this room. To this truth. And now, there was nowhere left to hide. But what they didn't know yet was that I wasn't done. Because the real decision, the one that would determine everything, was still mine to make. And this time, I wasn't going to walk away quietly. The room felt smaller after that, like the walls themselves were closing in on everything they had tried to hide for years. No one spoke at first. My father just stared at the documents, his hands trembling slightly, his silence louder than any denial he could have made. My mother's quiet sobs filled the space between us, and Liana, she looked completely lost, like the ground beneath her had disappeared. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one standing there, begging to be heard. I was the one holding the truth and deciding what came next. I didn't know, Liana whispered finally, her voice breaking in a way I had never heard before. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, I believed her. Because for all her arrogance, for all the years she stood above me, she had been living in a version of reality that was carefully built for her. A version where she was the center, where everything was secure. But now that illusion was gone. And what remained was someone who didn't know how to stand without it. My father finally spoke, his voice rough, stripped of the authority it once carried. Enid, I can explain, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head slightly. No, I replied, my tone steady but firm. You've explained enough over the years. Just not the truth. The words didn't come from anger anymore. They came from clarity. From a place that no longer needed validation or apology. Because some damage doesn't get undone with words. I stood up, walking slowly to the window, looking out at the city that had witnessed my lowest point and my rise. You asked for another option, I said, turning back to face them. Here it is. Their eyes locked onto me, hope and fear tangled together in a way that almost felt surreal. Because they still didn't understand. This wasn't about saving them. This was about ending the cycle that had been built on lies, favoritism, and silence. I'm not shutting the company down, I continued, and I saw the immediate shift in their expressions, relief flooding in too quickly, too easily. But then I finished. I'm taking it over. The words landed heavier than anything else I had said. Confusion, shock, disbelief. My father shook his head instinctively, like he hadn't heard me correctly. You can't. I can, I interrupted calmly. Legally, financially, and ethically, I can. The terms were simple, but not easy. Full ownership transferred. Complete transparency. And most importantly, accountability. Not just to me, but to everyone affected by their decisions. This isn't revenge, I said quietly. This is consequence. And correction. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because the power behind it wasn't emotional anymore. It was earned. Every sleepless night, every rejection, every moment I had to rebuild myself from nothing. It all led to this. My mother tried to speak, her voice shaking with regret. We were wrong, she said, tears falling freely now. We should have. I raised my hand gently, stopping her. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need to hear it anymore. I know, I said softly. And that was enough. Because forgiveness isn't always about words. Sometimes it's about distance. About choosing peace over reopening wounds that have already scarred. Liana looked at me differently now. Not with superiority. Not with competition. But with something unfamiliar. Respect. maybe even understanding. You really don't need us anymore, do you? She asked quietly. I paused for a moment, letting the question settle before answering. I never needed to be less. For you to feel like more, I said. And in that moment, something shifted between us. Not repaired, but acknowledged. As I walked out of that building, I didn't feel victorious in the way people imagine. There was no rush of triumph, no overwhelming sense of revenge fulfilled. What I felt was lighter, like had finally put something down that I'd been carrying my entire life. The past didn't disappear. It never does. But it stopped controlling me. And that was enough. The girl who was thrown out on Thanksgiving, she thought she had lost everything. But the truth is, that night didn't take anything from me. It revealed everything. My strength, my worth, my ability to survive without the people who never truly saw me. And in the end, they didn't lose everything because I wanted them to. They lost everything because of the choices they made. And I finally found everything because of the choice I made to walk away.